Hi everyone, and welcome to one more episode of the Allplane Podcast, where we talk with the movers and shakers that are redefining the future of commercial aviation. As usual, before we start, I would like to remind everyone that all previous episodes of this podcast, as well as many other aviation stories, are available on the Allplane website. That's Allplane.tv, Allplane.tv. And now let's go to today's episode. Today we're gonna talk about brands and design. It doesn't matter the country you are in. Airlines tend to be among the most easily recognizable brands. And many of the most iconic of those airline brands, I'm talking about those that have become global brands in their own right, are the work of a single creative agency. I am talking, of course, about Landor. This is the agency that since the late 1960s has come up with some of the most famous and iconic brand and livery designs out there. I'm talking about British Airways, Alitalia and its successor, Etihad Airways, Singapore Airlines, Etihad, Saudia, Austrian Airlines, and so on. The list is quite long. So today on the podcast, Ryan Frost, Executive Creative Director at Landor, will share some insights about what makes a great airline brand. In today's uber-competitive air travel market, how do you get to communicate a set of values and messages to your prospective passengers? This is one of the questions we are going to try to answer. And we're going to also talk about specific airlines where the imprint of Landor is still very present today, such as British Airways, and how this airline has somehow managed to continue embodying the evolving essence of Britishness. Also, Etihad Airways, a particularly eye-catching recent airline branding project, or Etihad, which is a project that Ryan is particularly proud of. More generally, we are also going to dig into the different visual language elements that airlines use to communicate their value proposition. Virgin Atlantic and easyJet being two particularly illustrative examples of how you can use things like the color palette to express the deeper foundations and goals of a business. So tune in for this short but intense chat about one of the most, let's say, visible aspects of the airline business with one of the professionals out there that knows the most about it. So without further ado, let me welcome Ryan to the podcast. Hello, Ryan. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Miguel?
Very good. Listen, today we're going to have a very special episode because we're going to talk about an aspect of the airline industry that it's possibly what most people are familiar with, which is airline brands and how airlines communicate a series of values through brands. So, Ryan, can you tell us a bit about yourself and the work you do at Landor, which is, for people that might not be familiar, Landor is an agency that has designed some of the most iconic airline brands out there. Not just now, but since the 1970s, I think. BA, Singapore Airlines, Austrian Airlines, Alitalia. If you check the airline brands that Landor has been involved with in some way, that's a really impressive list. So, Ryan, just to start, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your role at Landor, and then we can maybe talk a bit about airline brands.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Ryan Frost. I'm an executive creative director. I'm based out of our New York studio, but I work across most of the Americas. As you can tell from my accent, I'm also a Brit. I actually just relocated the family over from London at the beginning of this year. So I'm getting to grips with the American culture, which is actually kind of fundamental to what I do as an executive creative director. It is to build brands that resonate with their audiences. And I've had the fortune over my 17 years with Landor to have worked on actually the equal number of airlines. I've actually worked with 17 airlines in my career at differing degrees, like everything from livery concepts right through to service philosophies, right through to helping as part of consortiums to design onboard experiences as well. So as you mentioned, our kind of heritage with airlines goes back to Walter Landor. He was an absolute pioneer in bridging between consultancy, so the strategy side of business, through to design and understanding how design can help businesses achieve their goals and their growth that they need. Then right through to experience as well, like being able to go through the entire customer journey, relationship journey with any of the brand's audiences, from packaging through to aviation design. So it was an actual honor and a highlight in my career to actually work with one of Walter's favorite brands of aviation that he worked on, which was Alitalia. Walter worked on Alitalia in 1967 and created a modern Italian icon. The livery was still in service, and thus the brand flying until 2015, which is actually when I then took on with my executive creative director at the time the role of modernizing Alitalia and bringing Alitalia up to the standards of their current consumer group and their current audience. So it was a real honor to craft and modernize all of those symbols and design principles that Walter had laid down almost 50 years prior to me working on it.
Quite a few things to unpack here. I don't know. First of all, just out of curiosity, are you also involved in the current Airways brand design, which is a successor of the historical Alitalia?
Yes, we helped the business transition from Alitalia to ITA, and we actually use our Milan studio to actually do that work, which was great because what we learned from the research and the kind of consultancy part of what we did when we took on the challenge, that actually proximity, provenance, and that local sense of existence was really important in being able to create a distance between Alitalia and ITA in order that they could create reconsideration. So our Milan design team are experts in simplifying right down to those exact codes that really capture that emotional behavior. So we gave ITA a new identity that was based on Azzurri blue, which is kind of the unofficial color of Italy versus the flag colors, which where we were previously, and a pattern system that you would see that adorns the livery in a way unlike most, actually quite akin to our Etihad work, that represents all of those beautiful details and trinkets and moments that Italy has to offer when you get to explore the region. So it was a beautiful piece of work.
Indeed, it's one of the most recognizable airline brands out there, even if it's been around for a relatively short period of time, following the demise of the historical Alitalia and the conversion into this new ITA Airways. But the list is really impressive. I mean, I've got here the list of airlines that Landor has been working with in the past, and it even gives a name to a certain style of livery, the Landor livery that British Airways was using for quite a long time, I think.
Yes.
British Airways is such an iconic brand, and I would like to kind of dissect a little bit what this brand conveys. And in part because British Airways this year, actually at the end of this month, is going to turn 50. Well, that's a bit debatable. I think British Airways was saying that it was centenary airlines because it was tracing its roots back to some airline from the 1920s. But if we consider British Airways as a brand, it starts in 1974. At the end of March 1974, it was the merger of BOAC and British European Airways, the two airlines that merged to form what has since been known as British Airways. It's a milestone that I think it's a great moment to look into what the British Airways brand means and what are the elements that define this brand. So in your opinion, as an expert in this field, how would you define the British Airways brand? What do you think? What do you think are the most distinctive elements?
It's a sense of Britishness that you get when you fly with British Airways that makes it distinctive. I think over the years, they've really managed to capture that quintessential Britishness, which is it almost feels it's really difficult to pin down. But there's something about Britishness that has to be experienced to believe, hence the tourism side of the brand as well. Like there's something about the way that they commit to that sense of national identity, but then also contribute to that sense of national identity that makes them unique as well. Like the way that they haven't revolutionized their onboard safety film over the last few iterations. They've continuously built on that sense of tradition, the comedic value, the representation of great British personalities, and the celebration of everything that makes Great Britain unique. So they work tirelessly to continue that sense of Britishness and uncover it and pull it in different ways, which is really unique to them.
Mm-hmm. Would you say the choice of color, the graphic elements also help give this element of, I don't know, like stability, elegance, understatement, but at the same time, very solid?
Absolutely. I think when you boil it down to an identity in terms of a series of assets that are on the livery, the fuselage, the way that they managed to take those national colors, those national signifiers of the red, the white, and the blue, which by many means turns up in many different senses of national identity as well. But they bring it together in an abstract way that shows the grace of the flag flying outside of great British establishments. And that abstraction, without showing it in its entirety, is what makes it smart, what makes it creative, what makes it innovative, they're all words that we would use to describe what is quintessentially British, Britishness as well. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this, in my opinion, this contrasts a little bit with, there are two other British airlines that have used a kind of different approach. We have airlines like Virgin Atlantic, for example, with this bright red, and easyJet with this also very bright orange that's really in your face. So how would you define these different approaches? I mean, as an expert in this field, what do they communicate to you when you see them at an airport? For example, you see the BA aircraft next to the Virgin Atlantic one, and maybe there's an easyJet one next around the corner as well. And they are all British, but they kind of communicate different messages.
Yeah, of course. And I think it's something that we come across in pretty much every country, in every continent around the world when it comes to aviation. There are the brands that stand for the national identity, and we quite often call them national carriers or legacy carriers. They definitely see their role as flying the flag for the nation and really promoting that sense of national identity. Then you get other brands like Virgin Atlantic that are born from the mindset of the nation. It's an idea. It's a philosophy to take on the innovative mindset and challenge all of the conventions of the category. And that's what Virgin Atlantic did incredibly well. They that mindset that comes from Branson is to accept that nothing should really exist in a box and everything can be made better. So what you're capturing there is an idea, a mindset of Britishness versus the identity of Britishness. And then when you get down to easyJet, what's really interesting, obviously, about that brand is whilst its provenance, its birthplace was Britain, and quite often the British public have an affinity with it, they don't necessarily stand for Britishness. It's just their location. It's where they exist. What they stand for in the marketplace is actually that sense of convenience and value when it comes to travel. And you will find that again in every market around the world. There are the airlines that are trying to defend and create value based on the audience, the passenger, without trying to take on all the pressures of the category as well. Because we know, obviously, it's a category that is very difficult to do business in. There are so many factors that contribute to decline and growth. It quite often pays to be single-minded in that.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned quite often when you were explaining this, you alluded to a national identity, but of course, a national identity also is something that is evolving as well over time. I mean, the Britain of 2024 is not the same Britain of 1974 in many different ways. So, of course, there are some elements that are still there, like the monarchy, certain traditions, but also in terms of how people travel and the perception of air travel as an industry has changed quite a lot. The type of people that travel today are possibly not the same that were traveling in 1974. So how does a brand manage to keep these permanent elements and combine them and evolve over time to reflect this changing nature of the society it operates in? In the case of British Airways, for example, we can use it as an example because it's a very clear case of a brand that has been evolving as well. The Landor livery of 1974 has gone through several iterations. So today's livery is different from the one they had in the 1980s, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you rightly say, the challenge from a passenger perspective has radically changed since 1974. In 1974, what airline branding meant was establishing an identity that could be easily recognized as a piece of signage during your flight experience, right? So whether it's a billboard right through to check-in desk, to identifying the plane at the gate, to then that moment of memory when it's blazoned on your ticket stump, right? Because back then a lot of people collected those and they kept them as mementos. Now, what a passenger expects from a piece of branding is no longer for it to sign, but actually to communicate. The way that brand turns up has to constantly evolve in the right channels to ensure that it's communicating, right? And I think a prime example of that, as you already said as well, Miguel, is BA, in the fact that the livery hasn't changed for quite a long time. It's still the sign of that sense of national identity at the very top level, right? That kind of system one level thinking. But then when you look at the safety video and the way that I think they very intelligently evolved that over time, that sense of proximity to the customer, that emotional connection is done at that moment. And ultimately, that's one of the greatest things about working with an airline today is they have the richest customer journey that you could ever imagine for a brand. You get to talk to the customer at so many different touch points and so many different modes that make the way that we build those brands today substantially more communicative than we would have done in 74 when, as I said, it was very much about establishing a sign.
Mm-hmm. You touch upon a point that I wanted to ask you about is the touch points, because right now, perhaps most customers, most passengers have a more direct relationship with their airline that they might have had in the 1970s because of it's a more direct channel online. You can buy your ticket online directly. You don't need to go through an agent necessarily. You can interact with the airline through the mobile app, through digital customer channels, social media, etc. So in terms of touch points, let me phrase it this way. The livery and the colors and this sort of more general identity is just one part of the brand. But what are the other elements that you need to take into account when you are designing a new airline brand? So can you guide us through obviously at the top level, what are the main touch points and the elements where a designer has to intervene, come up with some ideas to keep this consistency across this journey?
Yeah, of course. I think let's start with the most recognizable moment, right? You've already mentioned it's the livery. And the way that we think about the livery design is that it's the first promise to the customer, right? When you look at these glorious, magical flying machines, if they are monolithically white with a splash of blue, your promise of travel is somewhat bleak, somewhat lacking of emotion. When you look at a carrier like Etihad or the one we already mentioned, ETA, or even one of my all-time favorites, the previous incarnation of Air Canada, you look at that fuselage, that livery design, and you go, okay, wow, these guys have really looked at every detail, and they're not just trying to pull me on board an efficient flying machine. There's going to be a moment of ritual and a moment of storytelling. And I think that is the thing that's really important to us, is the establishing of this story. The way that we look at anything, and I've already mentioned our kind of enthusiasm for the customer journey, is that our passenger is the hero of the story that we want to tell, right? The way that we then break down that customer journey through those assets, as you said, we've got to think about how that story comes to life. So what does the booking experience look like? It's a digital channel, but when you are simply filling in a where, from, to, dates, etc., there's an expectation of that can be set there in terms of difference of story, just through the tone of voice, the way that even the word that says that turns up on the find or the go button. Then you push through into the uniform design. The uniform design goes a long way to think about the story of that airline as well, and the story that it wants to tell. Hawaiian Airlines do a beautiful job of syncing all of that story together. And then you come into the onboard experience. Rather than looking at the actual seat designs and the actual onboard configs as this kind of efficiency of fast turnaround and getting the next passengers on there and the longevity of the product, each one of those moments is a moment of storytelling that we can talk about our provenance or our purpose and the thing that we want to get out into the world. It is ultimately about establishing that emotional connection. So I guess to my point is that whether it's online or offline, whether it's physical or digital, what is the common thread is the humanity that goes across all of that. And that human story and that sense of storytelling is what connects us emotionally. And we see every application, every point in that customer journey as an opportunity to connect emotionally with the customer.
Does this apply as well to, for example, low-cost airlines, or that's something that this sort of human touch and storytelling is the preserve of more premium brands like Etihad or British Airways, for example?
No, I think it has to be even more relevant of a theory to ultra low cost and low cost carriers, because that is the most highly competitive space, right? There's so many of them that it becomes actually it doesn't really matter what bus I get. I'll get whatever bus is at the right time going to the right place. So you're not creating loyalty if you're not thinking about emotional connection. So arguably, they don't have to be these big grandiose statements. They don't have to cost tons of capex, but a little bit of humanity goes a long way, whether it's a message on the back of the the antimacassar, or it's just a way of introducing the cabin at the start of the flight. It goes a long way to create those emotional connections that make us memorable in our customers' minds.
From your words, I guess you are not a big fan of the so-called Euro livery style of airline brand, of airline livery that's become so
Absolutely.
common.
I'm an avid what's the word detractor, if you will, from the theory of the big Euro blue. I think there's a huge consideration that comes into the sustainability and the longevity of a piece of livery design. But I also don't think the world needs more bland. A brand should never be bland. A brand has to exude character and personality that in an authentic way that allows us to create emotional connection. And the big Euro blue where you squint your eyes and they're all essentially the same thing flying in the sky, I see that as a hugely missed opportunity to connect.
How often should a brand be renovated? Because we have seen some redesigns, like British Airways, for example, had this original Landor design through the mid-70s all the way, I think, through the 90s. In the 90s, they did some modifications, I think. And then there was another redesign, I think, a few years ago, which is the current one. Same with other brands have been tweaking, but it's, as a non-expert, for me, it's hard to tell when is the right time, because sometimes we get used to a certain brand and we're comfortable with it. But yeah, I mean, time goes on and maybe we are missing out on opportunities to do something different and to communicate at a different level. I don't know.
Of course. I think that for me, it's a very simple answer that it can take on a lot more dimension, but the answer is simple in that a brand really only needs to be renovated when it's changed its story. And what I mean by that, if there is a new purpose, a new piece of strategy that is guiding the business in a different direction or is looking to amplify a certain direction, then there cannot be any dissidence between the way that the brand is showing up and what the brand is standing for. So in order to own that story, that renovation has to take place.
Do you have an example of this? Because, for example, Etihad Airways is clear. There was an airline, Alitalia, that had to be reconverted, or however you want to call it. Actually, it was technically a new airline that was created. But in other cases, not so obvious. Like there are brands like, I'm thinking, for example, Singapore Airlines, I think has had more or less the same brand for ages. And still, I think it's a pretty strong brand. Some other airlines have taken to modify them every certain number of years. But what would be the triggering event here to say, well, it's time to change because our story has changed? Do you have an example of this?
Sure. We can dig into a little. So one of the contributing factors to needing to change the story would be whether a business is in decline, or that we've recognized through constant consumer insights and tracking that our brand is no longer relevant with its audience. So again, creating that gap. I think we saw a very subtle reinvention with the rebrand or the renovation of easyJet. Actually, what they had done in the marketplace was set up this sense of low fare, and they were using their orange in an interesting way that essentially meant discount, right? Wherever you saw orange, it meant I was getting a discount fare. They very smartly, very intelligently reframed the use of orange to be about the added value, the emotional connection that can happen through travel, the optimism, the joy. So I think what they would have done at that point is say, from a business, and obviously I don't know this for fact, is we've grown, but to create to substantiate continued growth, we're going to have to change our story from discount to value, and that's what would have drove that renovation of the brand. So what they did again is keep everything that was recognizable, but they presented it in a way that forced reconsideration, that made people think twice, look twice, and their entire messaging around it changed as well.
There are so many excellent liveries out there that are the work of Landor, that I wanted to ask a personal question. If you have one that is your favorite, or you can just name a few.
Yeah, of course. It's a tough one, but there is one that like will always, until the day they change it, of course, be my favorite. And that is Etihad Airways. And there's a number of reasons for that. Actually, the first one comes back to what we were just talking about in terms of story. As a design team, we had the fortune of spending a considerable amount of time in Abu Dhabi and really getting to grips with what Abu Dhabi was and how it expressed itself in order to think about how that nation turns up in the world. And that's where we had the idea for the facets of Abu Dhabi. And that is what we call all of the glorious triangles and facets that adorn the livery. And it was born from creating a visual signature that represented all of the architecture and all of the detail and all of the color change that you see very vividly in Abu Dhabi. So the story of it, I loved and still love. It still gives me this epic sense of pride when I'm at the airport and I catch one. I was actually just in Frankfurt the other day, and there's a couple there, and they just shimmer on the runway and on the gate. The other aspect of it is actually incredibly technical to create that livery. There are so many colors, there are so many facets, and it's also asymmetrical, right? So typically you would either design the sides of the plane or you design it like a cylinder. That's kind of convention. The way that we decided we were going to do it, in keeping with the nature of Abu Dhabi in terms of a nation, it's continuously pushing and it's very artful. We designed the left, the right, the top, and the bottom. So if you're ever at the airport and you catch a view of the Etihad plane, the facets that run on the top are asymmetrical. And to be able to do that was just this technical triumph, that working with Airbus and working with Boeing to do that, it gave a lot of people headache, but it also gave a lot of people great sense of pride when you walk into the first one being painted and you see on an A380 just the gigantic VTP with all of these incredible facets on. So twofold, definitely Etihad.
On a personal note, I can say that I was at the public unveiling of this livery in particular in Hamburg. That must have been about 6 or 7 years ago, even more, even longer. They unveiled at the same time, I think, the first A380 and the new livery with this big show. I think I've got a video somewhere on my site. I'm gonna post it in the show notes so that people can check it out.
I can tell you, I was there as well. So we were probably sat in close proximity.
There you go. There you go. For people that wish to learn more about Landor and your projects, the work you guys are doing in this field, are there any resources you could recommend?
Yeah, of course. So our website of Landor.com has a whole host of case studies, with our most recent airline rebrand on there, which is Saudia. You can see in great detail about that. There is also on our social channels lots of great thought leadership and articles around what we do in the day-to-day of building brands that are designed to transform business.
We'll be adding some links so that people can check it out and spend some time browsing through all these very colorful liveries. And yeah, in the meantime, just left for me to thank you very much today for spending some time here on the podcast, sharing some insights about the process of designing a new airline brand and all the secrets behind this art. Thank you very much, Ryan.
And thank you for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And if you ever want to talk about airlines again in more detail, just give me a shout.
Sure. We should do that some other day and dissect some of the airline brands out there and talk about the different elements and messages that they're communicating. So thank you very much.
Sure.
If you like this podcast, you can support us by giving it a great rating on Apple, Spotify, or whichever platform you get it from. And remember, you can, of course, subscribe to it. And you can also get regular updates through the Allplane website. That's Allplane.tv. We have a newsletter where we cover the aviation industry every week with a special focus on innovation and sustainability. So give it a go. Thank you and goodbye.